And good afternoon. My name is Evan Weiner. Been there before. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me. And we're going to go back 67 years now, 67 years to the year 1955, which is one of the mileposts on the road to the baby boomers' future. The baby boomers come of age in 1964, the first ones turning 18. And that's a 1955 Chevrolet, not far from where my granddaughter goes to daycare. And last summer, I'm looking at the car and I said, hey, let me take a closer look at that. And it was 1955. And I said, perfect. I'm writing a 1955 talk. That car isn't in all that great a shape. They need some work in the interior, but it's there and it serves my purpose for this talk. 1955. 1955 was the year that the polio vaccine came out with Dr. Jonas Salk, who invented the polio vaccine. Emmett Till was killed in Mississippi. Rosa Parks, she wasn't the first one who refused to give up her seat on the bus. She's just the most famous one. The Miracle Man, Diem, South Vietnam. Only man standing between communism and South Vietnam. Diem becomes the leader of South Vietnam in 1956, 55 rather. The Warsaw Pact, all the people behind the Iron Curtain, the countries behind the Iron Curtain, sign an agreement that if anybody attacks them, and the Soviets are part of it, it's an attack on all of them, and they will all pitch together and defend themselves. The Baghdad Pact, that too, same thing. It was countries like Turkey and Iraq. You attack one of us, we are going to protect each other. Disneyland opens, and if you take a look at that picture, take a close look at that picture of Mickey and Minnie. They look kind of scary, don't they? I mean, it doesn't look like Mickey and Minnie, but Disneyland opened in 1955. The Mickey Mouse Club, featuring Annette, started in 1955. The first McDonald's opened on April 15th, and that was in Des Plaines, Illinois, on April 15th. Elvis, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Elvis signs with RCA Records. And the question, do I mention Brooklyn? Brooklyn, next year finally comes. And there's a Johnny Padres story that's going to come out of this. The golden age of radio, it's over. I mean, a couple shows survived, but when Jack Benny calls it or is canceled in 1955, it really signals the end of the golden age of radio, although by that point, it was over anyway. Oh, the transistor radio. The transistor radio makes its debut in 1955. And how many of you put the transistor radio underneath your pillow to keep it away from your parents? I bet one or two of you did. Einstein dies. And talking of science, that is Dr. Jonas Salk. He's not a Facebook expert on polio, nor a Twitter expert on polio, or a Reddit expert on polio. He's a real expert on polio. And he didn't go to Google to find out how to conquer polio. In 1947, Dr. Jonas Salk was appointed director of the Virus Research Laboratory, University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. With funding from the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, now known as the March of Dimes Birth Defect Foundation, he began to develop the techniques that would lead to a vaccine to wipe out the most frightening scourge of the time, polio. And it would take him about 8 years to get there. That's an iron lung. Nobody wanted to be in an iron lung. An iron lung was there to help people breathe. And that was one of the side effects of polio. The research, contrary to the era's prevailing scientific opinion, Dr. Salk believed his vaccine, which was composed of killed polio virus, could immunize without risk or infecting the patient. Gave it to himself, gave it to volunteers who did not have polio, his lab scientist, his wife, children. All developed anti-polio antibodies, and we're talking a lot about antibodies and vaccines here in 2021 and now in 2022. Everyone developed an anti-polio antibodies. and experienced no negative reactions to the vaccine. It works, screamed the Journal American, the New York Journal American. Salk's vaccine works. It works. Not a Facebook expert, nor a talk show host expert. He was the real deal. 1954, national testing began on 1 million children, ages 6 to 9, who became known as the polio pioneers. On April 12th, 1955, the results were announced. The vaccine was safe and effective. In the 2 years before the vaccine was widely available, in 1953 and 1954, the average number of polio cases in the US was more than 45,000. By 1962, because of the vaccine, it dropped to 910. And there was no scheme to get rich overnight. There he is, Dr. Salk, in his laboratory. He never patented the vaccine or earned any money from his discovery, preferring it be distributed as widely as possible. The great CBS newsman Edward R. Murrow interviewed him on one of the shows, See It Now, and he asked him, he says, who owns the patent? Well, nobody really. There's Franklin Roosevelt, who is a major proponent of the March of Dimes, and of course he had polio. The March of Dimes, by the way, Eddie Cantor, who was big in the 1930s into the 40s and was still a radio performer into the 1940s, raised a lot of money for the March of Dimes, volunteers, and that's what Salk was talking about. Well, the people, I would say. Said Salk, in light of the millions of charitable donations raised by the March of Dimes that funded the vaccine's research and fielding testing, there's no patent. Could you patent the sun? Lawyers for the foundation had investigated the possibility of patenting the vaccine, but didn't pursue it, in part because of Salk's reluctance. He didn't want to make money on this. In fact, I'm not even sure he wanted to become famous. He just wanted to have something that would prevent polio. But in 1955, as in 2022, you have the know-nothings who, in this case, radio or newspaper columnists, today they're on TV, or Facebook experts or Twitters, Walter Winchell. I'm a journalist, and I've been doing this for decades, and I can never understand the appeal of, say, Walter Winchell or Heather Hopper, or Dorothy Kilgallen, or any of those people in the 1950s, and Earl Wilson in the 1960s, and nor could the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Walter Winchell goes on radio. And of course, he's an influential newspaper columnist for whatever reason. Walter Winchell, no scientific credentials, none whatsoever. And his sources, sometimes you got to wonder about, warned that the Salk shot was a killer. Authorities, Winchell claimed wrongly, were stockpiling little white coffins to handle the vaccine's victims. There are people who say the same thing about the COVID-19 vaccine to this day, or through the life of the vaccine, which is over a year. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, on its editorial page, took Salk's side and said that Winchell was distinguished for a long career of washroom gossip, self-glorification, and journalistic vendettas of the basest sort. And that's the nice things you could say about Walter Winchell. But the vaccine worked. It worked. Well, might have hurt, but he worked. A United Press wire service article that ran in newspapers across the country April 13th reported hundreds of doctors and registered nurses stood ready to begin the stupendous task of inoculating millions of children throughout the country. My wife has a cousin who actually have seen this talk, and he was in school in Paramus, New Jersey. And he said back in 55, 56, whenever he got it, they brought everybody down to the auditorium. Parents were there too, one by one. They were inoculating all the students. They lined up. They marched in a line, got to the desk. The nurse gave them the shot, and then they went down to sit down. He said that's how they did it in Paramus, New Jersey in 55, 56. The know-it-all critics, so they were out there, same as today. Some hitches developed in Maryland's Montgomery County, which is the area between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore on the Washington-Baltimore Turnpike, and also I-95. 4,000 parents flatly refused to let their youngsters receive the vaccine. 2 counties in Indiana said, no, 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 you're not giving us that shot because it's socialized medicine. And there was a disaster. Unfortunately, there was one disaster because the Cutter Laboratory out in Berkeley, California, actually mixed it up wrong. One of the 6 labs manufacturing the vaccine, the Cutter Laboratories in Berkeley, California, made a terrible mistake. The correct list of ingredients for the Salk vaccine called for the virus that was to be inactivated, but the Cutter factory, the process of killing the virus proved effective. As a result, batches of the company's vaccine that went out mistakenly contained the polio virus. Of the 200,000 children who received the defective vaccine, 40,000 got polio from it, 200 were left with the various degrees of paralysis, and 10 died. Well, that's a problem. That's a big problem until you figure out what happened. So the polio vaccines were temporarily halted following the error. After Cutter's manufacturing error was pinpointed as the problem, vaccinations restarted within weeks with renewed quality control efforts and minus any involvement from the Cutter Laboratories. Mothers and fathers jumped right back into line following the Cutter tragedy and once again signed permission slips, lining their children up to get their polio shot. Now, there were 2 groups of people in the United States, whites and Negroes, and that extended to the vaccine as well. The March of Dimes knew they had a problem. They had a problem with Negroes because of the Tuskegee incident and doubt in the Negro community that this really worked, and also Jim Crow, racism in the South. So they recruited some people, including Ella Fitzgerald, to push people to get the vaccine. Vaccine efforts at the time had to contend with racism. In the Jim Crow South, Black children lined up for shots on front lawns of white schools while the white children got their shots inside. The March of Dimes knew that they had to do something, and they had to recruit prominent and popular Black performers of the day to ask or to tell people, get your polio shot, it's worth it. Among the people they asked, Sammy Davis Jr., Louis Armstrong, and Ella Fitzgerald. All of them joined the March of Dimes campaign. We talked about Jim Crow in the South and the murder of Emmett Till. And it still resonates 67 years later. Emmett Till was 14 years old. He was down from Chicago visiting his relatives. He was born in Chicago, grew up in a middle-class Black neighborhood. He went to visit relatives in Money, Mississippi, when the 14-year-old was accused of whistling at Carolyn Bryant, a white woman who was a cashier at the grocery store. On August 28th, Emmett Till was killed. On August 24th, Carolyn Bryant, the woman behind the counter, claimed that Till grabbed her, made lewd advances, and wolf whistled at her as he sauntered out. Well, that got the attention of her husband. Obviously, she told her husband and his half-brother, Bryant and Millam. The assailants, Ron Bryant, the husband and half-brother, J.W. Millam, abducted Till from the house of his great-uncle, Moses Wright, where Emmett was staying, and then made Emmett carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan to the bank of the Tallahatchie River and ordered him to take off his clothes. The 2 men beat him nearly to death, gouged out his eye, shot him in the head, threw his river in the body, tied the cotton gin with barbed wire to the body, and threw him into the river. 3 days later, his corpse was recovered, but it was so disfigured that Moses Wright could only identify it because he had an initial ring. Mississippi authorities knew that they had a problem. Big problem. Get rid of the body. Get rid of the body. Bury it down here. Don't let anybody see it. But Till's mother, Mamie Bradley Till, requested it sent back to Chicago. There would be an open casket funeral. And I realize this is a gross picture, but this was in Jet magazine. And Jet magazine talked about Negroes often lynched for crimes of guilty whites. And there is the mother and there is the corpse. And it was shot and it ended up in the magazine and didn't make Mississippi look too good. September 19th, Mississippi. Negroes and women were barred from serving jury duty. Bryan and Millam were tried before an all-white, all-male jury. Moses Wright took the stand, which was courageous, very courageous, because they knew where he lived, and identified Bryant and Millam as Till's kidnappers and killers. Despite the overwhelming evidence of the defendant's guilt and widespread pleas for justice from outside of Mississippi, on September 23rd, the panel of white male jurors acquitted Bryant and Millam of all charges. The deliberations lasted a mere 67 minutes. I knew a guy by the name of Fred who worked for United Press, who was down in that neck of the woods, 58 to, rather 58 to 62. And he was a reporter, and I knew him from the New York Press Club. And he told me, he said, things like what happened to Emmett Till were open secrets. Nobody kept their mouth shut. Everybody knew it. He said the cops were in on a lot of this stuff. The cops were members of the KKK. Fred had to leave his assignment in 1962. He was a Jewish guy from New York who was writing all of this. And United Press thought, you know what, we better get him out of here because his life could be in danger. Look magazine. I am not a proponent, never have been a proponent as somebody in the news business, of paying somebody for their story. Look magazine and the other magazines of the time paid people for their stories. And the Emmett Till killing ended up as a story for Look magazine, looking to capitalize to increase circulation. And they figure, let's throw $4,000 the way of the two guys, Bryan and Millam, and let's get them to tell the story. And they did. In January 1956, Ron Bryant, the husband of Till's accuser Carolyn, and his half-brother J.W. Millam admitted to committing the murder of Till. They were protected by double jeopardy laws, so they didn't care. They weren't going to jail. So they decide, hey, look, let's give us $4,000. Let's tell the story because we did it. And what's the big deal? We did it. Everybody knows in town we did it, except it stayed in town. This one went international. So they tell Look magazine the whole story of the kidnapping and how they killed Till, and they got $4,000 out of it, which would roughly be $53,000 now. So they got $2,000 each. So multiplied by 12, right? They get $24,000. The article would destroy Bryan and Millam's lives because, hey, it's okay. Everybody knows in town what happened, but outside, even Fred told me that. Everything was inside when he covered the civil rights movement for UP. But they got away with murder. Bryan and Millam lost their businesses and no longer were accepted by their community after boasting of the murder. And here's the question. Where are you, President Eisenhower, on this? Where are you, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI? Where are you? Don't you make a statement on what is going on? Ike never made a statement, and J. Edgar Hoover would have been better off not making a statement. The Till family wanted answers from the federal government. The president, Dwight Eisenhower, and the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, said no federal investigation. Till's mother sends a telegram to Eisenhower. He doesn't bother answering it. And J. Edgar Hoover wrote in a memo, there's been no allegation made that the victim has been subjected to the deprivation of any right or privilege which is secured and protected by the Constitution and the laws of the United States. Till was killed. I think that that kind of took away his rights that he was killed. But J. Edgar Hoover went on to hunt communists and whatever else he was doing. Till's murder is a keystone to the start of the civil rights movement. That is Rosa Parks. And that is Rosa Parks in 1955. And this Monday is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, celebrating his life. And Martin Luther King, comes into prominence in 1955. Now, Rosa Parks was not the first person refusing to give up her seat on a bus, a public bus. Irene Morgan, back in 1944, did so on a trip between Virginia and Maryland. She had a miscarriage and she was going to see her doctor. And basically, she was told to give up her seat for somebody else, and she wouldn't. And they ticketed her and threw her into jail, and she sued, and she won in the Supreme Court in 1946 that at least on interstate buses, everybody was supposed to be treated equally. 1953, there was the Baton Rouge bus strike or boycott, and the Montgomery boycott basically followed what happened in Baton Rouge in 1953. Rosa Parks, not the first person to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama on the bus. She's merely the most famous. Rosa Parks was an anti-segregationist activist. She was the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP. She attended civil rights trainings. She tried to raise money for the release of other young black women who had been arrested earlier that year after refusing to stand on Montgomery buses. The first one was a 15-year-old by the name of Claudette Colvin, who is still alive, by the way. And at the end, there's a twist in the story at the end. 9 months before Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her bus seat, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin was arrested in Montgomery for the same act. The city's black leaders prepared to protest, including the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was 26 years old at the time. But it was discovered that Claudette was pregnant. And because of that, she would not be a good symbol for their cause. On March 2nd, the bus driver ordered her to get up. She refused. She paid her fare. It's her constitutional right. Two police officers placed her in handcuffs, arrested her. School books went flying off her lap. And there she is again in 1955. All I remember was that I wasn't going to walk off that bus voluntarily. Colvin was arrested on several charges, including violating the city's segregation laws. After her minister paid her bail, she went home. But she would not be done with being a civil rights activist, and has not been done to this day. But Martin Luther King wants absolutely nothing to do with Claudette Colvin, and there he is. He's got his pulpit. He's in Montgomery, Alabama. The local civil rights campaign then was led by a little-known Montgomery pastor by the name of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who ostracized her. Colvin believed it was a combination of factors that caused that: her age, her gender, her dark skin tone. A couple months later, she became pregnant out of wedlock. And that is the bus that Rosa Parks was on. It's at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, which is kind of odd given that what Henry Ford really was in life, that he would have a civil rights section in his museum, although it wasn't him, it was his kids who have tried to repair Henry Ford's legacy with the Ford Foundation and other things. But anyway, that's my wife standing in the bus. The bus was obviously purchased, or they got a hold of it and redone, and that's what it looks like today. The three women who preceded Parks in saying no were Claudette Colvin, 15, Aurelia Broder, 37, arrested for violating Alabama's bus segregation laws April 19th, and Mary Louise Smith, age 42, arrested for violating Alabama's bus segregation laws August 21st. They wanted the seat: Claudette, Rosa, Mary Louise Smith. Colvin, Browder, and Smith all arrested for the same thing. I'm not giving up my seat. Rosa Parks, December 1st, same thing. I'm not giving up my seat. But Rosa Parks was seen as the ideal person to rally around. She was working class, but an established figure in Black Montgomery's middle class. She was the leader in the local NAACP. She was a respected pillar in the Black community. And there was nothing in her personal life, absolutely nothing in her personal life, that could be used to shift attention away from the real issue, racial segregation. Roughly, that's where Rosa Parks was on the bus, the back of the bus, of course, when she refused to give up her seat. Parks was going home. She had been working as a seamstress at a downtown department store, and was tired all over. I was sitting down. The bus driver wanted me to stand up, give my seat for a white passenger, male passenger. It was a custom in the law, but I simply couldn't do it. She refused, and she got arrested. The incident sparked the Montgomery bus boycott and was one of the factors that kicked off the civil rights movement. Parks was fined $10 and paid $4 in court fees. The Montgomery bus boycott by local African Americans starts on December 5th. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would jump into national prominence immediately as a civil rights leader because of the bus boycott. Vietnam. That was a French problem. The French decided they wanted to reclaim Indochina after World War II, and it got bogged down into all kind of fighting. They wanted Laos, they wanted Cambodia, they wanted Vietnam, the whole Vietnam, back in the fold. And they were also having problems in Algeria. America gets involved. Now, Americans were getting involved in places covertly, let's say. Eisenhower and the United Kingdom were involved in the overthrow of the government in Iran, 1953, because of oil. Eisenhower and the Dulles brothers, Secretary of State, CIA head, were involved in the overthrow of Guatemala in 1954 on behalf of United Food or Chiquita Bananas. Arbenz, who was the head of Guatemala, wanted to give some land to the peasants so they could make some money. United Food was not very happy about that, and Eisenhower and the Dulles brothers had very close contacts with, contact with United Food, so that was accomplished. Eisenhower decides it's in America's interest to back Diem, the only man standing between North Vietnamese communism and South Vietnam remaining free. We're going to have to back this guy. South Vietnam must not fall to communism like Red China or Communist China. Thank you, Stewie Gates, my 9th grade teacher up at Spring Valley High School, junior high school, in Rockland County, Spring Valley. South Vietnam must not fall to communism like Red China and North Korea. Red China going in 1949, North Korea in 1950. On October 26, Diem proclaims that South Vietnam is now the Republic of Vietnam. He's the first president. He condemns the northern government as authoritarian. That's Ho Chi Minh, and blocks the national elections that the 1954 Geneva Accords mandated, making certain that Vietnam is not united under communist rule. November 1st is the official start date of the Vietnam War between the Democratic Republic of Vietnam and the Republic of Vietnam. The North, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, is aligned with the Viet Minh, and that would become the Viet Cong in 1960. And there he is. There's Eisenhower, Dulles, and the Miracle Man, Diem. Eisenhower starts to send military advisors, all of whom were not drafted, all of whom were enlistees, to South Vietnam, investigates huge sums of money, trying to transform South Vietnam into a showcase of the free New Asia. He supported Diem, who started to use brutal tactics to suppress his opponents and Buddhists in his own country. Eisenhower wanted to create a pro-American nation in Southeast Asia and halt communism. Why? Well, part of it was the domino theory, because he felt, and his administration felt, the loss of South Vietnam to the communists would lead to similar communist victories in the neighboring countries. Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, possibly India, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, and even Australia and New Zealand. And that would cause massive harm to the West. The possible consequences of the loss are just incalculable to the free world. The United States would start its commitment to defend South Vietnam in 1955. I was born in 1956. And my father told me that he was in the Army 53 to 55, that he was felt, in his platoon felt, they were headed to South Vietnam for a war. The Warsaw Pact, speaking of the communists, the Warsaw Pact. May 14th, the Soviet Union, Albania, Poland, Romania, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria signed a treaty establishing the Warsaw Pact, mutual defense organization that puts the Soviets in command of armed forces of its member states. The treaty called on the member states to come to the defense of any member attacked by an outside force. It was a reaction to West Germany joining NATO. And here we are, the Baghdad Pact. And these were the pro-Western countries in the Middle East. And you look at the pro-Western countries of 67 years ago and the pro-Western countries of today in the Middle East, there's been a major shift. The Baghdad Pact was a defense organization for promoting shared political, military, and economic goals, founded in 1955 by Turkey, Iraq, Great Britain, Pakistan, and Iran. Similar to, by the way, Turkey, ally, Iraq, ally of Great Britain, Pakistan, ally of Great Britain, since they got their own country in 1947, and Iran, Shah of Iran, they knocked off Mogadishu in Iran for the oil, and the Shah is there, and the Shah is grateful to the United States and England, so they're an ally. Similar to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, the main purpose of the Baghdad Pact was to prevent communist incursions and foster peace in the Middle East. Now, Dwight Eisenhower was 65 years old in 1955, retirement age, right? And Dwight Eisenhower, some question about how healthy he really was. He has a heart attack in September of 1955. It's September 23rd, and he's at his in-laws' house in Denver, and he went to play golf at the Cherry Hills Country Club, and he has this pain in his chest and his stomach. Dr. Paul Dudley White probably saved Eisenhower's life and introduced a new care for heart attack victims. See, before Eisenhower, if you had a heart attack, you stayed in bed until the doctor felt you were strong enough to get out of bed. But they tried something on Eisenhower, and it worked, and it is now standard procedure to this day. Get out of bed, start exercising immediately, and it worked for Eisenhower. Don't cry for me, Argentina. Oh, wait, that comes in the 1980s. I used to think that song was Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. It was after the Ike and Tina Turner split up. Don't cry for me, Argentina. In 1950, Argentina's post-war export boom tapered off. Inflation grows, corruption grows. After being reelected in 1951, Juan Perón becomes more controversial and repressive and seizes control of the press to control criticism of his regime. But his number one aspect, his number one secret weapon was Evita. She was loved, Evita Duarte, and Evita Eva Perón. In July 1952, she dies of cancer. And support for President Perón among the working class drops. They seem to like Evita. They didn't seem to like Juan Perón. I think that's what happened on Broadway too, right? Yeah. Anyway, Perón's attempt to force separation of church and state met with considerable controversy. In June, church leaders excommunicated him and encouraged a clique of military officers to plot his overthrow. September 19th, the Army and Navy revolted. Juan Perón was forced to flee to Paraguay. Wow, it's a long time ago. It's my wife at Disneyland. What do you do on your honeymoon? You go to Disneyland. That's what I did back in 1982. The Magic Kingdom. Disneyland at that point was a year older than me. I was 26. Disneyland was 27. Disneyland opened on July 15th and is shown to the country on the struggling ABC TV network as a special show hosted by Art Linkletter with Ronnie Reagan, and Bob Cummings as the other hosts all around Disneyland. There's a reason it's on ABC. ABC's parent company, Paramount, which is now CBS's parent company, but that's another story for another day. Paramount invested heavily in building Disneyland. Walt Disney didn't like taking his two young daughters to amusement parks, which he felt were dirty and filled with toothless ride operators. He wanted a clean place where he could take his kids. And he designed the idea of Disneyland with a roller coaster. And all the experts told him it's not going to work. No amusement park ever worked without a roller coaster. And he was going to people he knew in the business, which was the TV movie business. He went to Bill Paley over at CBS, and Bill said, "Yeah, if you get it built, do a show. We'll take the show." He went to NBC, David Sarnoff. "Yeah, if you get it built, we'll take a show." The problem was that there were a lot of amusement parks around. Even in the 1960s, I lived in Queens. It was Fairyland over in Queens Boulevard. There was where the New York Times printing press is today when you go down the Whitestone Expressway to the Grand Wick, south off the Whitestone. There was an amusement park there. I know you had amusement parks in New Jersey as well. So Ride Playland up in Westchester. So I'm just giving amusement parks in the area just to give you kind of a lay of the land, because it was like that all through the country. San Francisco out at the Sutro Baths, and there was a Playland as well. So they were all over the place. So there wasn't really need for amusement parks all over the place. So everybody turns them down. Nobody's interested except Paramount ABC. Part of the Walt Disney story, Paramount ABC. Struggling along as a poor third or maybe fourth player, with Dumont in the picture in those days. And they only had 14 stations, ABC at that time, 14 affiliates. As a third player or fourth player in the embryonic television industry, ABC's Leonard Goldenson saw the opportunities to prosper, and he finds this guy in Walt Disney. 1954, ABC Paramount guaranteed $4 million bank loan for Disneyland, owned part of Disneyland, operated some of the concessions at Disneyland, and also the Disney television show, which would be weekly, was on the ABC network after the television showed off the premiere of Disneyland. And there was a request for a second show, the Mickey Mouse Club. Okay, only time in my life I ever wore mouse ears. My wife suggested, we're in the Disney shop, oh, put on the mouse ears, because I'm a Bugs Bunny guy. I like Warner Brothers. They'd all be Borscht Belt comedians, all wise guys from Lower Manhattan. You know, Bugs, although Daffy supposedly is from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. But anyway, so I got the Mouseketeers in, and she took a picture of me with the Mouseketeers ears. Anyway, the mouse ears. M-I-C, oh, who's the leader of the club that's made for you and me? M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E. The Mickey Mouse Club premiered on October 3rd. And I bet you can't name all of the Mouseketeers, but I bet you can name one. Annette. Probably don't know that Don ended up going on to My Three Sons and all that stuff. But anyway, Annette was the star. It was a weekday daily hour show, which featured a cast of kids who were known as the Mouseketeers. The show presented skits and musical numbers, introduced special guest stars, serials, Disney reel segments from around the world, plenty of Disney cartoons, and Annette Funicello was the most popular Mouseketeer, partly because she grew bosoms while she was on the show. The Mickey Mouse Club made ABC profitable. And there was Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. How many of you had a Davy Crockett coonskin cap? I was born a year later. I never had a Davy Crockett coonskin cap. But they were out there. And there's also a coonskin cap for girls as well. The 1955 success, Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, 1955 American adventure film produced by Walt Disney Productions. Big hit, the fad, the coonskin cap that was marketed to young boys featuring a fur-lined skull cap, the raccoon tail attached. Variation marketed to young girls as the Polly Crockett hat. It was made in a similar style to the boy's cap, including a long tail, but it was made of all white fur. At the peak of the Davy Crockett fad, coonskin caps sold at a rate of 5,000 caps per day. This is one of my kind of heroes. Kind of heroes in the sense that he made me like some commercials. His name is Rosa Reeves, and he is the original madman. He is the guy. He's the guy that brought you the Aniston commercial. To this day, that Aniston commercial, when I saw it when I was 3 years old or so, still resonates with me. You know, with the spring, tension, 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 boom, 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 tension, tension, tension. Rosa Reeves. Rosa Reeves got a doctor to pitch cigarettes, Dr. Kerry Middlecoff, who was a pro golfer, pitching Viceroy cigarettes, even though doctors knew by that point that smoking was bad for your health. Rosa Reeves was a pioneer of television advertising, generated millions of dollars for his clients. He changed presidential politics in 1952 with his handling of Dwight Eisenhower's TV campaign when he ran for office of the President of the United States. His most famous ad was for Aniston. Tension, 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 tension. It was grating, but remarkably successful, tripling the product sales. Hey, I'm going to be 66 years old. I saw that commercial when I was about 2 or 3. It still resonates with me. Oh, something that's still around? He was responsible for the M&M slogan. Melts in your mouth, not in your hand. He thought the commercial should have one central message. Hit the viewers over the head with his message, and it worked. Aniston, tension, tension, tension. The rise of American consumerism, the whole family around the old television set. TV starts selling the American dream. Families of all income brackets are buying televisions at the rate of $5 million a year. By 1955, Rosa had a piece of this. Companies spent $1 billion for TV ads. In 1949, companies spent just $12 million on TV spots. But you know, most cities had TV stations by this point. 1949, San Francisco didn't have a TV station. Dwight Eisenhower wanted people to spend, as America was at that point the richest country on earth, and it was a good way of forgetting the Depression years from 1929 into World War II, which started in 1941, the Berlin airlift in 1948, the Cold War, the Korean War, which started in 1950. American people saw consumerism, the new consumerism, as a way to de-emphasize class differences, yeah, to a point, while stressing traditional gender roles. You deserve a break today at McDonald's. McDonald's. That's the original McDonald's restaurant in San Bernardino, California, back in 1948. McDonald's famous hamburgers, buy them by the bag. Well, they weren't famous. It was a local hamburger joint that did okay. The story starts in 1948. The McDonald's brothers opened a restaurant on December 12, 1948, after they closed their existing restaurant to concentrate on items that sold most. Hamburgers in San Bernardino, California, the first self-service McDonald's, selling hamburgers, cheeseburgers, French fries, soft drinks, and milkshakes. In 1952, they moved into a new building with the Golden Arches. Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc's a traveling, basically it's a malted machine salesman. And he's traveling and he's got to sell these things. In 1954, he's selling the multi-mixer milkshake machines. He noticed that there were 8 machines in one store. And that got him to thinking, I got to talk to the McDonald's brothers, because you know what? This should be franchised. And I'm the man to do it. And he did. Opened the first McDonald's in Plains, Illinois, 1955, April 15th. Look at those old cars there. Look at them. They were new cars then. The first of Kroc's restaurants starts on April 15th, 400 North Lee Street, Des Plaines, Illinois. But there are cracks in the foundation. There are absolute cracks in the foundation. Yeah, Americans, they're prosperous. They're absolutely prosperous. But there's pressure, 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 pressure to keep moving up. And then on the other side of town, like in Montgomery, Alabama, there are people who have no rights. So the 1950s is a contradiction in some ways. The Cracks in the Foundation, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, a novel by Sloan Wilson. The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit was written by Sloan Wilson, and they questioned the American lifestyle of the 1950s. Tom and Betsy Rath are a young middle-class couple that share the struggle to find contentment in their hectic and material culture, while several other characters fight essentially the same battle. Tom sees how his boss's marriage and his family are being ruined by overwork, and men worked a lot. Men worked an awful lot, and they also wore the same clothes every day, kind of a military uniform, except it was a suit, gray flannel suit with a tie and a white shirt. So he turns down a high-pressure position involving travel in order to work normal hours and spend more time at home. The rat race, the unpleasant life of people who have jobs that require them to work very hard in order to keep up with others for money, power, status, keeping up with the Joneses. The average money income of families in the United States in 1955, about $4,400. About 6% higher than it was in 1954, according to the estimates released by the Bureau of Census Department of Commerce. The increase probably represented a significant gain in purchasing power for the average family, since prices were fairly stable during this period. Again, classes. Sidney Poitier recently passed away. His breakout film was called Blackboard Jungle. And Blackboard Jungle is kind of interesting because it does something to the American mindset. Blackboard Jungle is a social drama based about the teachers in an interracial inner-city school based on a 1954 novel called The Blackboard Jungle by Evan Hunter. The movie highlighted violence in urban schools and helped spark the rock and roll revolution because it featured the hit Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets. It's an ideal teacher who confronts the realities of juvenile delinquency. Film hits a nerve, not only in the United States, but in England too. It's a brutal depiction of social conditions of urban schools. Fights and riots break out in many towns in England where the movie is shown. The film, about juvenile delinquency, had an unusual amount of black actors for a 1955 movie. After all, there was still a code that restricted African Americans from being in movies that was imposed by Joseph Brain and before him by Will Hayes in the 1930s. And it's Sidney Poitier's breakout performance. The song, Bill Haley, Rock Around the Clock. Rock Around the Clock ushered in a frightening era for parents. And rock and roll was here to stay. There is Bill Haley and his Comets. The song, Rock Around the Clock, didn't grab much attention when it was released as a B-side in 1954. But once it becomes featured in Blackboard Jungle, it becomes a hit. It was the first rock and roll song to top the Billboard pop chart. It's credited with introducing rock music to a mainstream audience. And it links up rock and roll with juvenile delinquency. James Dean is killed in a car crash. His 550 Spider collided with a Ford two-door sedan on then U.S. Route 446 near Chelan, California. The Ford was driven by a 23-year-old Cal Polytech student by the name of Donald Turnipseed, and was turning at the intersection when the two cars hit almost head-on. Massive damage to the Porsche. The actor died almost instantly. His passenger, Rutherwich, was badly injured but survived. Because of that, James Dean remains forever 26 years old. His image is that of an anti-establishment teenager with delusionment and social estrangement. He only did 2 movies. Oh, when I was in school, particularly at PS 151 in Woodside, Queens, in the middle of the 1960s, We used to get Cornet films, and some of you probably did see, if you're near my age, Cornet films. They were great. They were so bad. They were so bad that they were worth watching. Cornet Films was a leading producer and distributor of many American documentary shorts in public schools. The company covered a wide range of subjects: zoology, science, geography, history, math. That's mostly remembered today, if you remember it at all. And I remember it because I thought it was just awful, awfully funny, actually. I remember that today for its post-World War II social guidance films featuring topics such as dating, family life, courtesy, citizenship, and especially how good girls were expected to behave. You know, the ones that didn't have the reputation. You remember those girls with the reputation. Every guy wanted to be with them, but they wanted to marry the good girl. There's a Cornet film that floats around YouTube that basically that there's this girl who walks in and she walks to a crowded table, and the girls are, and the guys are like, oh, ooh, do we know her? And basically all the guys have had her in various ways, suggested ways, and she couldn't fit in with them. And because fitting in was a big deal in the 1950s, you wanted to fit in with the crowd, right? And then the film goes to this girl who had gone to high school, who basically was pushing a carriage, and these two guys, this couple, is like, oh no, no, look at poor her, so and so. Teenage wedlock, rather teenage pregnancy out of wedlock, was actually a huge issue in the 1950s, as was juvenile delinquency. Wop bop a loo bop a wop bomb boom. Tutti Frutti on Rudy. Little Richard releases Tutti Frutti October 1955. A wop bomb a loo mop a wop bomb bomb. It's either a lyric to describe a drum fill that he wanted for the song, or how he talked back to his boss as a dishwasher at a Macon, Georgia Greyhound station. It was released on Specialty 561 Records, entered the Billboard Rhythm and Blues chart at the end of December 1955, rose to number 2 early in February 1956. Pat Boone's version of the song does better in the charts. Hey, Pat Boone is clean cut and he's white. Little Richard, he's a wild guy around the piano. The New York Daily News, the slogan, "Go tell it to Sweeney," called the music an insider of juvenile delinquency, and pointed at Alan Freed, chief offender. Little Richard, they didn't want me to be in the white guy's way. I felt I was pushed into rhythm and blues corner to keep out of the rockers' way, because that's where the money is. But it wasn't in 1955. It eventually became where the money was. When Tutti Frutti came out, they needed a rock star to block me out of the white homes, because I was a hero to white kids. The white kids would have Pat Boone upon the dresser and me in the drawer because they liked my version better. But families didn't want me because of the image I was projecting. Not sure Pat Boone would be considered a rock star, but be it as it may. Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline, why can't you be true? And go back doing the things that you used to do. Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was a St. Louis singer who went up to Chicago to try out for the Chess Brothers. The Chess Brothers were the king of R&B recordings, rather rhythm and blues recordings in the Chicago area, and had their own record label. St. Louis to Chicago, not a long drive. And, well, Chuck Berry wants to see Leonard Chess and Phil Chess. And cut a song at the Chess Records studio. It's called Either May, which might have been based on a song called Either Red. Leonard Chess likes the song, but thinks that it's too similar to Either Red. Listen to Either Red, doesn't seem that similar. But anyway, they decided they didn't want to run into copyright problems. So let's do something else with the song. A simple solution, just get a new name. And that was the problem. So nobody could think of a name, said the pianist Johnny Johnson. We looked up on the windowsill, and there was a mascara box up there with Maybelline written on it. And Leonard Chess said, why don't we name the damn thing Maybelline? Chuck Berry. Maybelline quickly rose to number 1 on the R&B charts. In August, it hit number 5 on the pop chart. At WINS in New York, the disc jockey, Alan Freed, played the song for 2 straight hours one night. Near Memphis, there was an unknown singer, except in that little quadrant, Louisiana, Tennessee, an unknown singer by the name of Elvis Presley, who began to include the song in his own performances. And there is Sam Phillips, and there is Elvis. And Sam's discovery was Elvis. Sam Phillips founded Sun Studios in 1950 in Memphis as a producer. He became one of the first white Southerners to record the great Memphis bluesmen like Howlin' Wolf and B.B. King, who he sent up to Chicago to work with the Chess brothers. Sam Phillips was looking for a white man who could sing like a black man. In 1954, he would find that man in Elvis Presley, and together they created a music that came to be known as rockabilly. He was working for Crown Electric, Phillips told Rolling Stone magazine. Remember, Elvis was a 19-year-old truck driver for Crown Electric. He was working for Crown Electric. I'd seen the truck go back and forth, and I thought, they're sure doing a hell of a lot of business around here. I never saw it stop anywhere. So Elvis had Case Detroit a long time before he stopped the truck and got out. And there's no telling how many days and nights behind that wheel he was figuring out some way to come in and make a record without saying, Mr. Phillips, would you audition me? So his mother's birthday gave him the opportunity to come in and make a little personal record. There's Sam and Elvis. There wasn't anything that striking about Elvis except his sideburns. They were down to here, which I kind of thought, well, you know, that's pretty cool, man. Ain't nobody else got them that damn long. We talked in the studio, and I played the record for him in the control room on the little crystal turntable, and walked up front and told Marion was the secretary, to write down Elvis's name and number, and how could we get a hold of him? Phillips didn't want Elvis to be a ballad singer. Nope. He put together a band for him with the guitar player Scotty Moore and the bassist Bill Black. Eventually, DJ Fontana would come in to play the drums and start to record Elvis. I knew he had the fundamentals of what I wanted. He was the first one I ever seen that had that potential. Had a different type of voice. And this boy had listened to a lot of different music, from Grand Ole Opry to Bing Crosby, Dinah Shore to Arthur Big Daddy Crudup to Bill Monroe to Hank Snow. That's all right. That was the hit, first hit. Scott and Bill, Sun record. And for me, that damn thing came through so loud and clear. It was like a big flash of lightning, and the thunder that follows. I knew it was what I was looking for Elvis. When anybody tells you that they know they got a hit, well, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Well, I knew I had it on. That's all right. I just knew I had found the groove, in my opinion. So I had to go on, honey. I mean, let the people hear it, but I didn't ask their damn opinions. It's a Grand Ole Opry, uptown Nashville, not the Ryman Auditorium or the Cathedral. I was there in 2002. Great show. Little Jimmy Dickens was there. Porter Wagner was the guy who was the MC. On October 2nd, 1954, Elvis gets an appearance on the Grand Ole Opry. It doesn't go over well. One of the Opry officials reportedly suggested, hey, Elvis, go back to driving that truck. But Elvis, Scotty, and Bill quit their day jobs in mid-October. They would appear on the Louisiana Hayride, a live Saturday night country music show, which originated in Shreveport, Louisiana, was broadcast over KWKH radio. It was the Grand Ole Opry's chief competitor, carried by 190 radio stations in 13 states. There's Elvis, the Louisiana Hayride, where he learns the trade. This leads to a regular appearance on the Hayride. In November, Elvis signs a one-year contract for 52 Saturday night appearances. The big break. He has records now and a regional gig. 1955. November 21st, 1955, Sam Phillips sells Elvis's contract to RCA Records. I'd looked at everything for how I could take a little extra money and get myself out of a real bind. I mean, I wasn't broke, but man, it was hand to mouth. Made an offer to Tom Parker, Colonel Tom Parker, the illegal alien who was Elvis's manager, 50-50. Elvis never appeared outside of the United States except for Toronto and Vancouver because Colonel Parker thought because he was an illegal alien, he left the country, they never let him back in. Side story. But the whole thing was, I made an offer. I didn't think they'd even consider $4,000 or $5,000. Plus, I owed Elvis $4,000 or $5,000. Rock and roll artists hadn't proven themselves yet. Elvis worked hard, sold some records, but was a middle-level performer on the circuit. The Sun studio recordings are now in the U.S. Congress National Recording Registry as of 2002. The Quebec separatist movement may have started because of a hockey fight in Boston between Rocket Richard of the Montreal Canadiens and Hal Lako of the Boston Bruins. It's March 13th. The Montreal Canadiens were playing in Boston, and the Bruins defenseman Hal Lako high-sticked Rocket Richard. Richard skated over to Lako, hit him in the face and shoulders with his stick. Richard continued to go after Lako and was restrained by the linesman Cliff Thompson. Richard broke loose and punched Thompson twice in the face and knocked him out. The NHL president, Clarence Campbell, who had been one of the judges at Nuremberg during the Nuremberg trial, came down hard on Richard, suspending him for the remainder of the season and the playoffs, and that did not sit well with the people in Montreal. And there would be a riot very shortly afterwards. It's March 17th. The Canadiens return home to play Detroit in what was to have been a first-place showdown game. The NHL offices were in Montreal. Campbell attended the game. Politicians said, stay away. Detroit got off to a lead. Midway through the first period, Campbell was pelted by eggs, vegetables. Why do you bring eggs and vegetables to a hockey game? There was also one other thing that they used to bring to Montreal. They were toe rubbers or galoshes. And if there was a bad call on ice, they'd reach down with their right hand, reach over to their left foot, pick up the galosh, and throw it down onto the ice. How'd they get home? I mean, that's supposed to keep, it's icy and cold and water in Montreal in the winter. And whatever. Also, a tear gas bomb was detonated and the Montreal Forum was evacuated. Detroit got a forfeit win, but that's no big deal. Richard has to go on radio because there was a riot in the street, St. Catherine's Street. Outside the Forum, the riot starts. All of this startled Rocket Richard, who I interviewed around 1990-92. He didn't know how popular he was, he claimed. I was really surprised to see that. I had to go on radio and ask the people who were doing all the damage on the street to the store to stop. Lasted one night, Richard told me. Richard was seen by French Canadians as a hero. The suspension sparked a movement, according to some, because Quebecois, a member of the Quebecois, Richard, stood up to an Englishman, Campbell, with the riot, or the Quebecois stood up to Campbell. Richard never saw it that way, but the Quebecois did, because 1749, Montcalm is killed on the plains of Abraham in Quebec City, leaving the French, by James Wolfe and the English, and that changed history in Quebec, and the English took over Quebec. Kermit is not a frog yet. He's almost Kermit the Frog, but not quite. Jim Henson introduces the earliest version of Kermit the Frog in the premiere of his puppet show, Sam and Friends, on Channel 4, WRC-TV in Washington. On January 7th, Marian Anderson is the first African-American singer to perform at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. The transistor radio. Transistor radio. I used to use it to listen to ball games in the 1960s, especially 1969 Mets. Under my pillow. They win a doubleheader against Pittsburgh Friday night in September, 1-0 and 1-0. And I listened to Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, and Bob Murphy. Ralph was a splendid guy. Really enjoyed hanging out with Ralph. Great storyteller. Neighbor of Phil Harris, by the way. But anyway, getting back to the rest of the story. Music and information suddenly became portable. No matter how isolated you were, you could hear the news of the world, and teenagers could listen to music anywhere they wanted. And that included being far away from the adults' ears. The transistor radio helped spark a musical revolution called rock and roll. And one woman told me, that transistor, I just flipped it under my pillow, and my parents never knew I was listening to Little Richard. The golden age of radio is gone. There's Dennis Day leaning over behind him as Rochester and Phil Harris and Mary Livingston, Mary Benny, Jack Benny, Don Wilson, and hey, the voice of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and all those other Warner Brother cartoon characters, and Barney Rubble, Mel Blanc. The Jack Benny program ends a 23-year run on radio May 22nd. Radio is leaving the serials and comedies behind and transforming onto a music format with Alan Freed, now a New York disc jockey, leading the way. Goodbye. That is Fleming, who invented penicillin. Albert Einstein died on April 18th. Fleming died on March 11th. Sir Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. Hello to Steve Jobs, who was born on February 24th, and Bill Gates, born on October 28th. Both of them transformed our lives, right? Got one of those? That was one of his. One of those and one of these, right? iPad and an iPod. Next year is here. Remember, somebody asked me, do you talk about the Brooklyn Dodgers? Well, I do. I got a story that you probably didn't hear. Johnny Padres won a 1956 Corvette. He wins Game 7. They party on Montague Avenue in Brooklyn. He's got the car and he drives home to Glens Falls on Route 9 on the east side here of the Hudson River. But he had an Army stint coming, so he had to do his time. He goes home and he comes back eventually after the stint. When I left, I gave the car to my father, who traded it in for a new Oldsmobile. It was a 1957 Oldsmobile. He traded my 56 Corvette for a 57 Oldsmobile. At the time, Padres didn't seem to mind the swap. The Oldsmobile, after all, was a good car. But he realized that his MVP trophy, that's what he won, most valuable player in the World Series, was gone. And nothing he could do to get it back. In 1989, he told me, I wish I would have kept that car. It would have been worth something today. The last time small markets won a major championship in sports was in the NBA, when Syracuse beat Fort Wayne to win an NBA championship. Last time minor markets would see a championship series. Red Kerr, who was part of the Syracuse team, said that they brought the team to lunch at the Chamber of Commerce. That's how they celebrated. Syracuse would move to Philadelphia, Fort Wayne to Detroit. Kansas City became a big league city. Baseball was king. Baseball was king, and if you had a baseball team, remember at the beginning of the 50s, 16 teams, 11 cities. 3 of them in New York. 3 teams in New York, 2 in Philadelphia, 2 in Boston, 2 in St. Louis. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Washington, Cincinnati, all had teams, 1 team. But 53, the Boston Braves go to Milwaukee. 54, Philadelphia, the St. Louis Browns in 54. From St. Louis to Baltimore, 55. Kansas City becomes a big league city. Philadelphia A's transferred there. And that happens November 4th, 1950. November 5th, 1954, team plays first game in KC, April 12th, 1955. The Kansas City A's, 1.4 million people, nearly 1.4 million people see them at Municipal Stadium the first year. The 1955 legacy, well, Elvis is not quite yet a big star. He becomes the big star in 56, and he takes a polio shot, and it helps get teenagers to take the polio shot. Dr. Salk's vaccine begins the end of the dreaded illness called polio. The last case of polio in the U.S., 1979. Between 1963 and 99, Dr. Albert Sabin's live vaccine largely replaced the Salk-killed vaccine everywhere in the world. Remember I told you about Claudette Colvin and something that would happen recently. On December 15, 2021, the juvenile court records of now the 82-year-old Claudette Colvin were sealed, destroyed, and expunged following a judge's ruling 66 years after she was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on the Montgomery, Alabama bus. And she was there. She's in a wheelchair now. She was there beaming. Emmett Till and Rosa Parks are civil rights icons, along with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 2017, Tim Tyson, the author of a book, The Blood of Emmett Till, revealed that Carolyn Bryant recanted her testimony, admitting that Till never touched her, threatened, or harassed her. Nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him, she said. Rosser Reeves and consumerism became an American habit. McDonald's became a worldwide hamburger joint. Blackboard Jungle opened the door for rock and roll. Elvis would become the king of rock and roll. Little Richard and Chuck Berry are remembered as rock and roll innovators. Sam Phillips never regretted giving up Elvis's contract. Oh, he made a lot of money investing in a small hotel chain called Holiday Inn. James Dean, 2 movies, a Pepsi commercial. His estate makes more than $3 million annually. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were at the forefront of the change in technology. The United States would have involvement in Vietnam until 1975. Quebec failed to get independence from Canada. The Walt Disney Company now owns ABC, and Paramount now owns CBS. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me, and thank everybody for being here today. I hope you have